Welcome everyone. My name is Heather Equinas. I'm with Co-Creative Consulting, and you have just joined a webinar on virtual meetings for clarity and momentum. We are so glad you're here. Before we dive into the content, we did just want to give you a moment of stillness to think about what you might need to leave behind to be more fully present right now with one another. I'll give you a moment. Great. So I'm so excited to have this time with all of you. As I've just mentioned at the top, my name is Heather Equinas. I'm with Co-Creative Consulting, and this is our session on virtual meetings for clarity and momentum. So Co-Creative, sometimes we describe our work as supporting people who don't know each other and sometimes don't even like each other, work together to solve complex problems and to create better futures together. We work across a lot of different sectors, and we primarily do that work through supporting and designing collaborative innovation networks and doing what we can to support and build the field of system practitioners, system leaders and practitioners. We are so excited to have Justine Porter co-facilitating this call with us from the Democracy Collaborative, and I'm going to turn it over to Justine to say a few words about herself.
Hi, everyone. As Heather said, my name is Justine Porter. I work with the Democracy Collaborative. The Democracy Collaborative is based in Washington, D.C. I'm calling in from Alexandria, Virginia. We work across the U.S. to catalyze a shift in our political economic system. We are working to build a more just, inclusive, and sustainable economy. The team that I'm part of and representing today is our advisory services team. We use facilitation as a tool to weave connections between groups that are working to build more democratic economies, democratic local economies. I just wanted to mention also that our team at the Democracy Collaborative works very closely with Co-Creative. We've been working with them over the last couple of years to facilitate a number of networks and events, and so it's a great opportunity for us to collaborate on this webinar together.
Thanks, Justine. And we also have Russ Gaskin, Co-Creative, running tech. So Russ, would you like to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I am, even though I spend most of my time designing and supporting collaborations among diverse groups of stakeholders, my comfort zone is being the tech guy. So I'm totally in my comfort zone right now, just being in the background.
So if you have any technical issues, feel free to private message Russ through Zoom and he'll help take care of you. So just wanted to offer up some context for why we wanted to create and host this session. Clearly, these are not normal times that we're living in right now. We're experiencing and needing to practice a lot of physical distancing, and we believe it really does require sort of us to facilitate ways to have greater social connections at this moment. We've also been sort of getting more clear about how people are experiencing this time in radically different ways. Some of us are on the front lines. Some of us have the privilege of sheltering in place. Some are experiencing a lot of isolation right now. Some of us, myself, I know, have this experience of actually never being alone, ever. And all of these things really impact the way we show up and participate in virtual spaces. And so to us, it became even more important for us to be able to sort of connect and collaborate across these online spaces more effectively. I'd also offer that one of the motivators behind wanting to host this session was we heard from a very dear colleague and friend and client who's a frontline social safety net provider, and she was describing her experience of participating in a string of online meetings that really left her feeling even more anxious, unclear, and really concerned and less confident about her community's ability to effectively mobilize during this time of COVID-19. And it sort of lit a fire under us because we know it doesn't have to be that way. And so our intent for hosting this session was to support us all to go deeper in how to bring about clarity and momentum into our virtual sessions. And we wanted to focus there because there's lots of places, I'm sure your inbox has been flooded as ours has, about how to do online meetings in general. You know, like what are the tech tools, here's how you use them, all that sort of stuff. And that's all great, and we need that. What we found is that the sticky parts about doing online sessions has been about reaching clarity and building momentum, that those are the trickier parts or more difficult aspects of moving our face-to-face experiences into online practices. So that's a little bit about why we wanted to support this session today. So that was a little bit about us. We would love to understand a little bit more about you, and I'll turn that over to Justine.
Great. So we mentioned in the email that you received that we're going to be using the Slido app a couple of times throughout the course of the meeting, and here is our first time. So we are asking you to share some information about yourself, and then we're going to share that out with the full group. So what you should do now is on your phone or on your computer, head over to slido.com. If you want to go on your computer, you might need to hit the escape button so that you can see your browser. So slido.com, you're going to be asked to enter in a meeting code, and that is virtual meetings. It is not case sensitive. And when you get there, you should see these 4 questions. So we're interested in knowing your name and your organization, where you're joining from today, one word that describes how you feel about virtual meetings or how virtual meetings make you feel. And then there is an option to let us know about what type of virtual meetings you're most concerned about. So head over to Slido and enter those questions, and then that should start to populate on the screen. Great. So as you can see, this is just as much for us as it is for you. It's great to see the different organizations that are in the room. Welcome, everybody. Okay, there's a pretty wide range of organizations, nonprofits, foundations, working on a wide range of topics. Awesome, welcome everybody. Okay, so it looks like everyone is getting into Slido and able to use that successfully. Russ, can you switch over to the next question? All right, so the next question is, where are you joining from? So we've got, looks like a bunch of different places, DC, California, home. Great, I think many of us are calling from there. Your living room, wonderful. Virginia, outside of Washington, DC, Bay Area, Toronto. Someone escaped from Brooklyn, well done. Vancouver, Detroit, Houston, so it looks like London, looks like we have a wide range of folks here. Welcome from Hawaii. Okay. And our next one, how do virtual meetings make you feel? Okay, so our word cloud, the big words that we're seeing are the words that multiple folks entered. So disconnected, fine, tired, curious, anxious, exhausting. Someone is feeling excited, that's great. It looks like we have some positive words, but perhaps they are smaller, awkward. Good one. What's that? Okay, so it doesn't have to be this way, and hopefully by the end of the meeting, we will have changed your opinion on this. Last week at the Democracy Collaborative, we had our first virtual staff meeting, and it was the best staff meeting I've been in during my time at TDC. So hopefully throughout the course of the convening, we can share some tools with you that will help transform how you feel and grow the positive words here. Last slide, Russ. Okay, so we're interested in knowing what primary type of meeting you're all interested in talking about. So it looks like multi-stakeholder collaboratives are the biggest one. There's some interesting staff meetings and multi-day events as well. So that's good. So as we go through the workshop today, we'll try to tailor our comments to all of these, but specifically multi-stakeholder collaborative. Okay, thanks everyone for doing that. Going back to the slides, just gonna walk, would have ticked education. Okay, there's another category as well. Here's what we're trying to do today. We are going to spend some time connecting. So we're going to create a space for you to connect with one another, meet some other folks in the room. We're going to spend some time aligning. So we want to get to a shared understanding of why it's important for us to be thoughtful as we manage a transition from virtual into a virtual space with our teams and our collaborations. Another outcome for today is that we want to learn about how virtual meetings can be a powerful tool to create clarity and build momentum. So this doesn't have to be something that we just accept and go with the flow with because we have to. This can be a really powerful tool. And finally, we're going to spend some time making things together. So in virtual spaces and in any meeting, we do want to do some talking, some aligning, some connecting and learning, but we also want to spend some time getting to work. And so we're going to pull up some collective insights in our meeting around what works in virtual meetings and what doesn't. And we're also going to make some commitments to the practices that we want to take back into our day-to-day work. So here's how we're going to do that. This slide makes a bold assumption that time still exists. So operating with the assumption that it does, we are just about to wrap up the section of the agenda where we welcome you, set the context, go through outcomes and requests. Heather's going to share some additional information, and then we are going to go into small group introductions. From there, we're going to go back into great breakout groups after reconvening and talk about the things that we know work really well and don't work well at all in virtual meetings. After that, Heather and I are going to share some tools and tips and practices that we use to build momentum and clarity in the virtual meetings that we've run. Finally, we're going to go into a breakout session, again with the same group, where we talk about how we might apply the things that come up over the course of this webinar to our individual work, and also lift up any remaining questions that we have, and then we'll pull it all together.
Nice. All right, so we have a couple of requests for you. One, we're hoping that you'd be willing to turn videos on. We welcome you, your kids, your partners, your pets. If today was a jammy day, we welcome that. If you got dishes in the background or Legos on the floor, all good. We would love to see your face. We recommend that you use gallery view, so you don't just have to look at anyone that's talking and just the slides, but you can see all participants. To do that, you can go up into the right-hand corner of the Zoom window and toggle between speaker view or gallery view. I've already requested that you sync up your phone and your video feed. We'll do a slide explaining how to do that just in case anybody missed that at the top. That's going to help make sure that both your audio and your video show up in the same breakout room together. In terms of the tech tools that we'll be using on this webinar today, we're going to be using, we'll send you a link to some Google Slides that you'll be populating. You've already experienced Slido, and we welcome you to enter in comments or questions in the chat as well within Zoom. We're asking you to be patient with each other and the technology in the spirit that we are all learning here. We do welcome exaggerated body language, or hand signals. So in the virtual space, it's much harder to pick up on all the nonverbal cues that we see when we're face to face. So we welcome thumbs up, thumbs down, head nods, shakes. It supports everyone to get some more immediate feedback. So the next slide will just show you again how to pair your audio and your video. Oh, I should have said, do expect some unfinished business. We know that 90 minutes will get us far, but it's not going to complete our work. So this is the tip slide on how to pair audio and video. And then the next slide also shows you how to rename yourself. So if you'd like to rename yourself or add your preferred pronouns, you can do that by clicking on your participant icon and going to rename. So we welcome you to do that now as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Justine.
Okay, thanks, Heather. So we are going to go into our first breakout room of the day, versus 3 breakout rooms. If you have not used a Zoom breakout room before, fear not. Russ is going to guide us into those rooms as soon as I walk us through the instructions. Once you get into your breakout room, you'll be there with about 4 other people. We ask that you appoint a facilitator. This person is going to keep this conversation going and make sure that each person gets about 2 minutes to speak. We'll send some messages out throughout the course to keep you on track. There's no need to report back, so this conversation is just for you to speak to each other and get to know one another. So here's the prompt. Once you get into your room, introduce yourself and share the answer to the following question. How are you? Head, heart, spirit, and body. So with that, we will break out into rooms now. Thanks everyone for participating in that conversation. Hopefully you had some nice conversations with everyone and an opportunity to get to know one another. These are the breakout groups that we're going to get into a few different times, so you'll get to know each other a bit more. We're going to go right into another exercise right now, and the purpose of this exercise is to tap into the things that you already know are working and not working in the virtual meetings that you've experienced either in the last couple of weeks or over the course of your career. We also just want to call out that face-to-face meetings and virtual meetings are different. We can't necessarily take the things that work really well in in-person meetings and translate them directly into virtual meetings. There is some adaptation that needs to happen in order to make that work. So we're really curious to hear about what you have to say about this. So on the slide that you see now, I'm just going to walk through this instruction. So you're going to be put back into breakout groups. You'll notice that when you get into your breakout groups, there is an automatic number assigned to your group. So you might be group 1, you might be group 56. Heather has shared with you in the chat a link to a Google Doc. We're going to ask that you go into the Google Doc and go to the corresponding slide for your group. So if you are group number 73, you should go to group number 73. There is no group 73, so it should be 1 to 30. Once you get to your slide, we're going to ask that you spend half of your time answering the first question, which is, what would we want to do if we wanted to have a terrible virtual meeting? So you all have experienced some of these things, but if you wanted to have a virtual meeting that was confusing, bog the group down, have people turning off their video and checking their phones, what would you do? Once we get halfway through the time, we'll send you a reminder and we'll ask you to switch to the opposite side of that question, which is, what would we want to do if we wanted to have a great virtual meeting? And this is a meeting where everyone is engaged, we're building clarity, we're not just getting things done, but we're building momentum. So that's what we're going to spend about 10 minutes doing. Just like last time, we want you to assign a facilitator to keep the group on track. But this time, we also want you to assign a note taker. And that person is going to be the person who fills in the Google Doc. together as we go through this activity. At the end of the session, that note taker is going to share out one top thing that worked and doesn't work from each column. Okay. Any other things folks need to know, Heather and Russ? No? Okay. Then let us break out.
Welcome back, everyone. If you wanted to create confusion and bog a group down in a virtual space, we would invite the recorder from your group to copy paste, drop one of those things that your group sort of converged around, if you did converge, into the chat box within Zoom right now. Love to just see some of the top things that emerge for folks. Just on the first column. If we really wanted to create confusion, bog stuff down, what would we do? All right. Yeah, so I'm seeing a couple of groups came up with overpacking the agenda. Can one of those groups say more? Emma, I see you put that in. Would you mind sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely found that there are a few more disruptions, and technology just tends to take more time. So allowing space for that and expecting to get less accomplished than you might in person.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for that. I'm also seeing some stuff around sort of poor pacing or really long formats. I saw it in a couple of different slides. I'm seeing, Daniel, you put it in here. Would you mind saying a few words about that, what your group talked about?
So we just talked about the importance in virtual meeting, or one of the things that sometimes people do is they will do like a long presentation, or they'll do long format types of non-interactive types of sharing, and that can often lead to disengagement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So breaking it up is, not breaking it up is something that would be challenging for virtual meetings.
Absolutely. There's a number of groups spoke about technology challenges. Bruce, would you mind sharing?
Yeah, I mean, it was expressed that, you know, people have different levels of understanding and capacity and familiarity with the technology. And so if we don't allow, you know, people to have a good chance to orient themselves and become familiar with the you know, format and the ways that the technology works, then we leave certain people feeling like very uncomfortable and unable to participate.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's impossible. We're not being really inclusive if we're leaving people behind when we're bouncing around technology. Yeah, great. Great. We would love to hear some of the ideas folks had about if we really wanted to build clarity and momentum. What were some of the top things your groups decided would be good to do in virtual settings? So if you're the recorder, if you could please drop in some of those ideas. Nice. I would love to pick up on I saw in the work groups products, a number of groups talked about having a clear agenda. Let's see, Dallas, I'm seeing that came up in your group. Would you mind speaking to that?
Yeah, hey, this is Dallas, and I was going to clarify that my work laptop has no camera, so sorry about no video. But
You have a cute dog, though.
Having the agenda is good, especially to help set out your outcomes and what you want to see come out of the group. And again, it goes back to not having it too full of items, just having like some easy to reach goals in your meeting is good to help it move along.
Nice, yeah. I'm wondering if, Melissa, you wouldn't mind speaking to some of the points that you made around having high levels of trust?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we talked about, you know, in order to get to clarity, people have to be willing to say that things aren't clear. And so we thought the way to, or kind of what we talked about was the way to kind of foster that in terms of helping people be willing to say, no, it's not clear. We need to keep talking about it in order to build that momentum.
Beautiful, yeah. Jenna, would you mind speaking to what your group was talking about in terms of honoring everyone's different operating speeds in this current state?
Sure. I'm Yana.
Yana.
Yeah, it doesn't read that way. Yeah, I think whether it's back and forth stressors that people are coping with through this, or environmental like distractions sometimes with managing. Not everyone has a separate room to go to. There's equity in this as well. So I think just staying connected and in touch and observing and not like blowing past people who are not able to engage at the speed that's present.
Nice. Yeah, so sort of being attuned to where people are at and not just pushing through or plowing ahead, right? Yeah. I think it also speaks to the point that Melissa, you were just making about wanting to build enough trust too for people to be able to show up completely and be able to express how they really are doing in that moment. So we can also share whether or not we're confused or need some more clarity and or could move ahead. Cool. Can someone speak to the role of technology? So I'm seeing Emma, for example, your group was talking about limit the number of tech tools.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate that you guys are showing some different options, but in a regular meeting, just maybe offering one or additional outside of Zoom to limit those.
Yep, nice. Yeah, we were talking about that too in the setup for this call because we wanted to demo some, but one of our principles is really limit the tech overhead along with the process overhead too. Could we just hear from Beth? Hey, Beth, on clarity of instructions. Tell us more about that.
We thought a lot of what we talked about was how important it is to really have a clear agenda and give really concise instructions when you're asking people to introduce themselves, how you want that to happen, and being thoughtful in advance about making sure that everybody knows the way to use the chat room and what the expectations are. So we talked about how important clarity is when we don't have standards for being on Zoom or an online platform together.
Nice. Thanks, Beth. Good to see you.
Yeah. Nice to see you too.
How about, so there's one in here about having an understanding of what we can do virtually and what's more challenging to do virtually, having reasonable expectations. Sandra, would you be willing to speak to that point?
Yeah, I think our group just talked about how different formats, whether you're in person or online, call for different realities to be understood about what you can and can't accomplish and how you're going to facilitate a meeting and how you're going to navigate it. So just being clear about that seems important at the start.
Nice. Great. Is there anybody that wants to make a general observation about what's emerging in terms of if we really, really wanted to have a terribly unclear and unmotivating meeting and some of those practices that are going to get us to that place of clarity and momentum? Are there any reflections anyone else wants to offer up?
It looks like Eduardo raised his hand.
Yes. Well, I think what I'm seeing from all this and what I've noticed over the last week as I resist on and off meetings is that at the end of this, when we go back to live meetings, I think the training that we'll have had unintentionally, accidentally, will have us go back and realize how important it is that everyone know their role in whatever conversation you're gathering, whether it's like just two people, like if I want, hey, I just want you to hear me out real quick, can I vent? And that's the role, right? Or is it 20 people, and does everyone know, hey, I'd like you to be a scribe, I'd like you to do this, I'd like you to do that. So I think right now, as I'm looking at this Brady Bunch picture, I'm realizing, gosh, we each have a role, and whether it was assigned or assumed, you know, the clarity that this is having to bring for everyone, right? Parent role, kid role, you know, I think that's what I'm getting super clear about, is that, wow, like we will all be trained in how to be with each other when we're in the same physical room too.
Beautiful, Eduardo. Thank you so much for that. Anyone else? Observations of the whole. It looked like Forrest, you had your hand up. Yeah.
Sure. So one of the things that we're finding is using multiple methods of communication. So having the Zoom method and the breakout rooms and things is a good thing, but also we've been using Slack a lot. And that really helps for quick communication, quick conversations that involve either one-on-one or small teams and things like this. So, you know, the principle or the theory that we've been operating under is that the more frictionless that we can make communication between, you know, leaders and those that are participating within various teams, the smoother that it goes and the more engaged each person feels.
Nice, Forrest. One thing that I'm seeing and hopeful for too is groups becoming more discerning about what needs to happen in a meeting versus what needs to happen offline. And I think that's a really healthy practice that I hope continues as we get to be physically present with one another again. Any other sort of generalized observations anyone on the call wants to make from these two lists?
I would just say that I miss the humor. It's really hard to have like a back and forth banter. If you're even small meetings, large meetings, everything is so paused until the next person speaks. And there's just not as much laughing as there is in our everyday.
I'm not sure how to raise my hand. So can I jump in?
Please do.
Yeah, then we have Aristea and Amber.
Great.
Okay. And I'm happy to follow others. I don't want to step in front.
You got it.
Okay. So number one, just to appreciate the humor piece, I use a lot of it in my meetings. And I was just thinking, as you were saying that, Deirdre, that maybe there are ways to like pull in New Yorker cartoons or little videos, but just something to bring that back into the space because it helps relax. I think it's really important. The other thing I think is trickier in a virtual space is pivoting between different meeting objectives. And so I was just advising a colleague that you can't have in the same conversation, I question the ability to have either a skills transfer or information exchange that then leads to a decision or something moving towards consensus, that you really need to pull those objectives apart and treat them separately, even though they're causally linked. Whereas it feels like if we were in the same room together, it'd be much easier to facilitate like, okay, so it sounds like X is emerging. How does that influence our decision-making or the challenge in front of us, how we think about it? And my feeling is much more clarity around objectives and really breaking them apart in a logical manner. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. So Russ, you said a cue. I know Aristea was on it. I know that Dre also had her physical hand raised. I think there was a third person too.
Amber.
Thank you. So Aristea, let's hear from you first, and then Amber, and then Dre.
Great. I just want to make a point about being really intentional about equity in virtual spaces. I find that it's really, really easy to slip back into folks who traditionally enjoy a lot of privilege to take up a lot of airtime in virtual spaces. It just kind of defaults that way. So, much like you set expectations at the beginning of this meeting, I think as a group, setting expectations in terms of airtime and who's sharing, what they're sharing, and how frequently they're sharing is also really important. And I think it takes a strong facilitator to be able to step in and reinforce those in the meeting as well.
Yeah, Thanks, Aristea. That's great. Amber, what you got?
Okay, there we go. You know, I work in public health and we do, I was thinking, oh my gosh, how are we going to get community involved and engaged? And we actually just had a city council meeting that our coalition had to attend last night. And I thought, what are we going to do? Are people going to show up? And usually on city council meetings after work, long, boring government meeting, we don't get a lot of volunteers to go and speak their mind. We actually had, I think we had 7 coalition members learn the technology, join the meeting, and actually say their public comment for this particular ordinance that we're trying to talk about. So I'm really actually quite excited that we might be learning a new technology for more people to be able to attend meetings. I think that much more participation, being able to sit on our couches and tune in, or in our cars, we had people on cell phones calling in. So I just like to offer that, you know, I've really seen a positive turn with this. Yes, it's challenging. I wholeheartedly believe in the trust component. Luckily, we were a coalition that had been meeting for years. So I think we have a good amount of trust, and we did some training prior to that to make sure we understood the technology for those that weren't very familiar with it on how to attend. So trust, facilitation, and hopefully it might mean more people can attend that weren't able to.
Thanks for sharing, Amber. I saw a number of people nodding. All right, let's hear from Dre, and then we're going to share a little bit of content with you about some ways we think about specifically how to build clarity and momentum in virtual meetings. So let's hear from you, Dre.
Yeah, I'm just noticing that with the chat room and the raising of the hands and the facilitating and breakout, that it's really helpful to have multiple facilitators or a team, so that you have someone that's managing the chat room and someone that's tech support. Are there people that are successfully facilitating these meetings and doing all of those things at once? Or basically, I'm just finding that you probably need 2 to 3 people to really be successful and make it work.
I would offer up, but then my response, but then I'm going to suggest that that's a really good thing when we go back into groups to talk with our group members about. So for me anyways, when I'm I'm usually able to do all of those things if it's a group of 10 people or less. If we're getting it up into the range of like 20 or so folks on a call, and I'm anticipating lots of input by chat and verbally, that's where it can be really useful to have an additional hand on deck to support some of that tech. But I'm sure people have other experiences with it too. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with all of us about what works and doesn't work about building momentum and clarity. We did want to share just a little bit of content with you about the ways in which we think about how to do those things. So we're going to share the slide deck again. Or Russ is going to share the slide deck again in just a sec. Cool. So this is just a really simple framework that we put together when we're thinking about designing sessions for clarity and momentum, online sessions. So clearly when we're thinking about a meeting, there's a whole lot of work that happens before the meeting even happens. So all of that preparatory work that goes into planning the session itself. There's the work of that happens during the meeting, and we think about the during the meeting phase as actually having 3 parts itself: an opening, the meat of the meeting, and then the close of the meeting. And then obviously after the session, there's all sorts of work that needs to happen as follow-up after the fact. And so when we think about this meeting cycle, we think about what needs to, we think about the content, the process, and the technology. So the content being the what of the meeting, the process being the how, and the technology is really figure out what tech we absolutely need to be in service to both the content and the process. So before the session, yep, that was right, Russ. The next slide, please. We really spend time getting very clear about the specific desired outcomes we want to achieve in that particular session. If you know co-creative well, you're probably familiar already with this CALM framework. CALM stands for connecting, aligning, learning, and making. But they're the 4 domains that we really call upon to design sessions that really support people to collaborate. And so we use this framework to identify specific outcomes to help people connect on a human level, to align around specific pieces of work together, to deepen their learning on specific topic areas, and also to support them to make very concrete work products and solutions together. And so we're always looking to identify the right mix of outcomes for virtual sessions because this is essentially the building blocks from which everything else comes from. I'm going to turn over to Justine.
Okay, so we're going to walk through the 3 parts of the session that Heather mentioned: before, during, and after. So before a session, some things that we like to pay attention to are, first, who is invited? If your experience over the last few weeks has been anything like mine, you've had maybe more meetings than usual pop up on your calendar. And part of that is because we are going through a transition, but part of it also might be because it's much easier to throw something on someone's calendar than it is to have to coordinate around in-person meetings. So I wanted to share about being choiceful about participants. One of my favorite books about gathering is called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. And she, in the 2nd chapter of this book, she writes about how not to invite people to meetings. So a line from here that I was appreciating earlier says, Barack Obama's aunt once told him, if everyone is family, no one is family. The same rule is true for gatherings. So here is a corollary to his aunt saying, if everyone is invited, no one is invited, in the sense of being truly held by the group. By closing the door, you create the room. She also provides a couple of questions that you might ask yourself to consider who to invite and who not to invite. But the first thing that we like to do after getting clear on what we're doing in the meeting is who needs to be there and why. Another thing to consider is the size of the group and what tools you might use. So as Heather mentioned, we might have done this differently if this was a meeting for 2 people or 10 people than a meeting for 60 people. One of the decisions that we made, for example, was to use a slide when we broke out rather than a Google Doc because we thought it would be easier for the group to collaborate in slide format. Resist the temptation to pack the agenda. So this is something that many of us struggle with in meetings in general, but it can be especially frustrating and convey a sense of defeat to not get through something in a virtual meeting, and it could really kill momentum. When you're meeting in person, if you don't get through things, folks can usually stay for a couple of extra minutes to wrap up conversations. That's not usually true in virtual sessions. So we want to be intentional about creating space. And then someone else raised the point earlier that because of technological glitches and getting up to speed on different platforms, you might also need to just build in some extra time. Heather spoke earlier about how we like to minimize process overhead and technical overhead. We have decided to show a couple of different platforms and tools during this meeting because we're trying to demonstrate and show you different tools that you might use. But in a normal meeting, you might keep it to 1 or 2 different tools. And then finally, before the meeting, we like to share out the outcomes, the agenda, and any requests of the group. So the emails that you got from Melissa all included links to Slido, for example. So during the meeting, there are 3 parts that we'd like to think about. So there's the opening session, the meat or the protein of the meeting, and the closing session. So in the opening, as you saw today, we like to start off with sharing the outcomes, the agenda, and the agreements. Many of you spoke about this in your breakout groups. We like to test any new technologies. So sharing a screenshot of how to do certain things, like linking your audio to your user on Zoom, can be really helpful to do that. And walking through how to find certain things within a platform can also be helpful, especially if it's a group that you haven't worked with regularly. We like to clarify roles, both within the team that is facilitating the meeting, and if there's ever breakout sessions. So we asked all of you in the breakouts earlier to find a facilitator, to have a note taker, etc., so that there was just a smooth feel to the way that we broke out. We really like to do check-in questions and introductions. So oftentimes in meetings, it's really easy to just jump into the content, but to the points that some of you raised earlier, it can be especially hard to connect with each other as people during virtual spaces. To the point about humor, if you make a joke and everyone is on mute, you don't know how folks are responding, so it's hard to gauge. So check-in questions are a nice way to create that human element. And then silence and meditation are also things that we can build in, either at the start, as Heather did with her reflection at the start of this meeting, or in between different activities. This slide here is just a simple example of how in a past meeting we have recorded the responses to check-in questions. This was done through an iPad. So someone from Co-Creative was taking notes as people responded to a check-in question. If you don't have an iPad, you could share a Google Doc and type as people go.
Cool. And so during the session, after we have an opening that hopefully provides some clarity and commitment to what it is we all need to be doing together, we get to the protein of the meeting. And so these are some of the practices that we think about in terms of supporting clarity and momentum. So one, having clear prompts that we are asking people to respond to. So we aim to be really succinct in sort of one clear question rather than a whole series or slew of questions. And we're also often encouraging people to share both verbally and written responses to those prompts. And sometimes what I do in especially smaller sessions where like 20 people or less, I'll make a queue of people's names and I'll put it in the chat. So that way I can alert people to when they're going to be called on, and I can call on them by name and they know their order in the queue. People can always pass if they want to, but it's just a way to avoid that whole thing where like everybody starts talking at once or nobody talks at all. We use a ton of templates, and we have a number of slides coming up that just give quick examples of some of those templates that we use. But we'd like to give people a container within which to focus their work, because it does lend that level of clarity and gives some and builds momentum. We rely a lot on visual note taking, and so sometimes that's on an iPad, but often you know, it's in a shared Google Doc that everybody can see. But the point is, we really rely a lot on the visual note taking because it helps a group stay on track. It can minimize repetition. Absent having the nonverbal cues that we get so well in face-to-face sessions, it's hard for people to understand if they've been heard. Having a visual record of what they're saying be reflected back to them and the whole group gives people that validation that yes, they've been heard and understood. And it's an easy way to capture agreements too. In terms of breakout rooms, you know, as with face-to-face, there's just some tasks that are easier to accomplish with groups of 4 to 6, and that can help build a momentum around advancing really specific pieces of work. And then we can gather back around as a whole group, which speaks to one of the patterns that we refer to frequently, which is around supporting a group to work concurrently. And then breaks, work sprints, silence meditation. We do all of these things because we are human. And so the slides that are coming up are just a few examples, and you'll have this in the slide deck, which we've mentioned in the chat that we'll share with you. But we're just offering them up as some examples of ways in which we've either taken notes visually or shaped up some of those containers or templates to support a group. So this is just a really simple example of how we've using a Google Doc, having a free form, unstructured conversation with a group in 20 minutes, but then synthesizing the notes, prioritizing things can be of great value to supporting a group to feel like we understand what we just, like we accomplished something good together today, and we understood what we're all agreeing to. Next slide. This is just a framework that we used in Google Jamboard to do some scenario planning. So before the session, all we had in there was option 1, press pause, option 2, advance some pieces of work, 3, charge ahead, and then the group as a whole ideated and filled in this scenario planning, and then people sort of voted where they were on that spectrum. Next slide. This is an example from the Democracy Collaborative of, again, using Jamboard to sort of plot out all of the different stakeholder groups that they were working with. And then the next slide shows how when they broke out into subgroups, one team then sorted all of those participants along areas of focus that those organizations had. So one variation. Next slide. So this was using Mural. And so this was really to support a group to come up with system interventions to support a particular community. And so first step to get there though was we first developed some personas to help give us insight into a typical kind of experience that someone might have that is part of that group. And then we used a key influencer map to just map out the different systems that that person is in contact with in their lives, which then led into that place of folks being able to design specific system interventions that would work for that particular population. And Justine's going to talk about a few more.
Okay, so this is an example of something that we did in a virtual breakout session with a group to map different ways of looking at a polarity. So this is just done in the Google slide as a whole group. Next slide. So this was a fun activity. We had 30 different stakeholders that we needed to have come to a consensus about how they would meet. Instead of having that as a full group conversation, we got them into breakout groups, gave them all a Google slide template, and had them move each of these columns that you see to come to agreement about how they wanted to meet. And what that allowed us to do is come back together and have a really interesting conversation. Next. So using humor in meetings, this was an example of a slide that we made for a group that was having trouble coming to consensus on a different work products that they were working on. So after the groups presented their work, we had them rank how they felt about the product on a scale of 1 to 5, and then we took an average for each presentation to see how the group felt. So that gave us some data. Okay, so at the end of the meeting, there's a couple of things that we like to do. First, summarize agreements, right? So what came out of the meeting that we need to advance, and getting specific about who's doing that, what they're doing, and by when. And then finally, we like to collect information on what worked really well in the meeting and what needs to change for the next time around. So on the next slide, we have an example. This might be something that you put, again, into your Google Doc to capture those next steps. And then on the next slide, I put a sample of a trick that I picked up from a professor. So we have a bi-weekly department meeting, and we use the same feedback form for every meeting. And all you have to do is drop down the date, pick the date of the meeting, and then you can answer questions about what worked, what didn't work, and things to consider for next time. So this allows us to have one spreadsheet with all of the feedback for all of our department meetings.
And so after the session, we obviously need to share out whatever work products we developed together in the session. Sometimes we synthesize them and make them even more sort of streamlined, and share next steps and agreements.
Okay. So we are going to get into our last breakout group. So the same groups as before. And what we want you to do is share one practice with your group that you heard on this call, either through the discussion, in your breakout groups or through the content that Heather and I just shared that you're really excited about and you want to try out in a virtual meeting in the near future. And then the other thing that we want you to ask or share with the group is what one question still remains for you. We're going to ask that a note keeper keep track of the answer to the first question. So we'll ask you to come back. We're going to ask you in Slido to share the answer to the first question. So the one practice that your team is excited to try in the next virtual session. All right, everyone. Thank you for coming back. I heard someone once say that going into breakout rooms in Zoom is like doing a meeting in a castle. There's so many rooms to go to. So Russ, if you could pull up Slido, those folks who are the note taker, head over to Slido, and if you haven't already, enter in the answer to the first question. So what are the 1 to 2 practices that your team identified that you would like to bring back? So it looks like we have a bunch of these in here already. So Jamboards are helpful, chat rooms are helpful, pronoun in the name field, that's a good one. Taking notes in a way that's visible to the group, that's great. So these are all helpful tools and practices that I'm very excited that you'll be using. Sharing funny videos in the middle of the agenda, that's good. All right, so now that you are all very advanced Slido users, we're going to try one more trick before this meeting ends. So everybody go to Slido right now, and here's what's going to happen. We're going to ask you to respond to this question. What is one question that still remains for you? Here's why this is an advanced trick. You can, in addition to inputting a question, you can also vote for the questions that you are excited about or that you also have. And so what will happen is we should quickly see which questions the group shares and are of greatest interest to the group. How do I know if my agenda is too packed? How do you ensure your virtual meetings are equitable? Question. How do I integrate all of these different tools? So in addition to asking your question, you can vote for, and you should vote for, the questions that you agree with or that you also have. And what we'll start to see is the top questions will float to the top. How can you practice all of these skills? How can you make everyone comfortable? Okay, so take a minute to vote for your top questions. How do you use Mural? What's the best combination of tools for different types of meetings and people? Russ, can you scroll up to the ones that are floating to the top? Great. So the biggest questions that are coming up here are how to integrate all of these different tools and how to help everyone become comfortable in virtual space and how to support them. How to ensure your virtual meetings are equitable. How do I help folks who are not tech savvy? So these are all great questions. We could take maybe a 30-second stab at answering one of them, and then we'll share out resources on the top ones after the meeting. Heather, do you want to take one? Oh, you're muted.
We only have what, like 30 seconds left
1 minute
for the
left.
whole call. And so my proposal was actually to take the top questions, and when we send back all the notes to everybody, we'll take a pass. We're gonna put it out in a Google Doc along with all of the data that you all just generated today on this call. And so I was gonna offer that we would take a first pass at answering some of the top questions that emerged in Slido, but we also welcome you all to continue to share your thoughts with one another after the call. Cool. So wanted to move to close and just go back to our slide deck. Sorry there, Russ, to make you jump all over the place. But I wanted to share our next steps. So one, as I've already mentioned, we're going to send out an email. Melissa Darnell will send out an email. Thank you, Melissa, with a link to all of the synthesized notes, a tool that we've already developed on running virtual meetings for clarity and momentum. You'll get the webinar recording and resources, and you already saw the bonus video. And please do try out your new practices. Finally, we do have some other webinars coming up. You can check those out here on this slide, or see, I'm sure we'll send out another email sort of reminder about other upcoming webinars. And finally, we wanted to get your feedback on this session using a toast metaphor. Thank you, Helen Brava, for this. So in your chat, if you could just use it to indicate how, which slice of toast best represents how you're feeling right now. Cool.
That's some pretty good toast.
Yeah, it's my style. Awesome.
Feeling toasty in here.
Oh, good, Jessica. I'm glad that you've moved up in your toast world. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, Justine, for joining too and helping us co-facilitate this session.
Thanks, everyone.